The shriek of Messerschmitt engines tore through the morning sky above southern England on September 23, 1940. Flight Sergeant Evander Whitmore pressed his wrench against the Merlin engine's supercharger housing, his knuckles white as another wave of Stukas screamed overhead. The sound of metal grinding against metal echoed from inside the engine compartment as he made one final adjustment to the boost pressure relief valve. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to do. Every regulation in the Royal Air Force manual forbade tampering with the supercharger's safety limits. Every order from command demanded strict adherence to Rolls-Royce specifications. But as Whitmore watched 3 more Spitfires limp back to base with bullet holes stitched across their wings, he knew that following orders would mean watching good pilots fall from the sky. The modification he was making would push the Merlin engine beyond its designed limits, risking catastrophic failure at 25,000 feet. It would also give British fighters the extra 3,000 feet of climbing power they desperately needed to get above the Luftwaffe formations that had been systematically overwhelming RAF Fighter Command for the past month. As he tightened the final bolt and wiped oil from his weathered hands, Whitmore muttered a prayer his grandmother had taught him in the coalfields of Wales. No one in the 609th Squadron knew that one mechanic's act of deliberate insubordination that September morning would rewrite the mathematics of aerial combat and turn the tide of the Battle of Britain. Evander Whitmore had never intended to become the man who would break the rules that saved the Royal Air Force. Born in the mining village of Rhondda Valley in 1915, he was the youngest son of a coal miner whose lungs had been weakened by years of breathing slate dust deep underground. His father, Gareth Whitmore, passed away when Evander was 17, leaving behind a widow, 3 sons, and a legacy of stubborn Welsh determination that refused to bend even when circumstances demanded compromise. Young Evander possessed an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that his teachers recognized immediately. While other young men his age were learning to swing pickaxes and descend into the dark tunnels that had claimed their fathers, Whitmore spent his afternoons in the workshop of the village's motor mechanic, learning to diagnose engine problems by sound alone. By 18, he could strip a combustion engine completely and rebuild it with modifications that improved both power and efficiency. When war clouds began gathering over Europe in 1938, Whitmore made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. Instead of following his brothers into the mines or factory jobs, he enlisted in the Royal Air Force as an aircraft mechanic, drawn by the complexity of the new fighter planes rolling off production lines across Britain. His training at RAF Halton revealed an almost supernatural ability to understand the intricacies of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that powered the Hurricane and Spitfire fighters. Instructors noted that Whitmore could identify engine problems that other mechanics missed entirely, diagnosing issues through subtle changes in vibration patterns or barely audible variations in engine tone. By the time he received assignment to RAF Northolt in June 1940, Whitmore had earned a reputation as the man who could make any engine run better than its designers had ever intended. He had no idea that those instincts would soon become the only thing standing between British fighter pilots and systematic defeat by a numerically superior enemy that seemed to hold every tactical advantage in the skies over southern England. The strategic situation facing Britain in the summer of 1940 was mathematically challenging in ways that government propaganda could never fully acknowledge. Hermann Göring's Luftwaffe had assembled nearly 3,000 combat aircraft across airfields in occupied France, Belgium, Holland, and Norway, creating a massive aerial armada that outnumbered RAF Fighter Command by more than 3-to-1 in operational aircraft. The Messerschmitt, 109 fighters that formed the backbone of German escort formations, held a crucial altitude advantage over both the Hurricane and Spitfire, allowing them to engage British interceptors from heights where the Merlin engine's performance began to deteriorate significantly. At altitudes above 25,000 feet, the supercharged Merlin engines that powered British fighters experienced a dramatic reduction in power output, while the fuel injection systems and advanced superchargers of German aircraft continued to operate at peak efficiency. This altitude disparity created a tactical challenge for RAF pilots who found themselves consistently fighting at a disadvantage against opponents who could choose the terms of engagement and maintain energy advantages throughout combat. Intelligence reports from radar stations along the English coast painted an increasingly concerning picture as August progressed into September. German formations were growing larger and more coordinated, with bomber streams protected by fighter escorts that operated in multiple altitude layers designed to challenge British interceptors. The mathematical reality was clear. RAF Fighter Command was losing experienced pilots faster than training programs could replace them, while German losses remained sustainable because their pilot training pipeline had been functioning at full capacity since 1936. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding and his tactical commanders understood that without some dramatic change in the performance characteristics of British fighters, the trajectory of the battle would inevitably result in serious challenges for Fighter Command's operational capacity. What they did not anticipate was that the solution to their strategic dilemma would emerge not from the engineering laboratories of Rolls-Royce or the tactical innovations of squadron commanders, but from the unauthorized mechanical experiments of a Welsh coal miner's son who refused to accept that German technical superiority represented an unchangeable reality. The crisis that would transform Evander Whitmore from a regulation-following mechanic into an unauthorized innovator began during the first week of September 1940, when Luftwaffe tactics shifted toward massive daylight raids designed to challenge British defenses through sheer numerical concentration. On September 7th, nearly 400 German bombers, escorted by more than 600 fighters, launched coordinated attacks against London's docks and industrial facilities, creating aerial formations so large that radar operators initially assumed their equipment was malfunctioning. Squadron leader Nathaniel Pembroke, commanding officer of 609th Squadron, returned from that mission with his Spitfire damaged by cannon fire and his flight reduced from 12 aircraft to 7 operational fighters. During the post-mission debrief, Pembroke's frustration became evident. The Germans are positioned up there at 30,000 feet with complete tactical control, he told his assembled pilots. We climb until our engines are struggling for air, and they still have another 3,000 feet of advantage to work with. Flight Lieutenant Archibald Westbrook raised the question that every pilot was considering. What if we push the Merlins beyond their rated altitude specifications? The suggestion hung in the air, forbidden and risky but impossible to ignore. Over the following days, informal conversations began occurring between pilots and ground crew about theoretical engine modifications that might restore altitude parity with German fighters. Whitmore listened with the focused intensity of a man who had spent his life solving mechanical problems others considered impossible, developing mental calculations about supercharger modifications that could increase Merlin engine performance at high altitude without immediately destroying the power plant through catastrophic failures. The mathematics were complex, requiring precise adjustments to boost pressure, fuel mixture ratios, and ignition timing that would push engines beyond design safety margins while maintaining combat reliability. The morning of September 15, 1940 dawned gray across southern England, and by 8:30, operations rooms were tracking massive German formations assembling over northern France. Nearly 1,700 German aircraft were forming coordinated waves, creating the largest aerial armada in military history. Evander Whitmore was completing maintenance when air raid sirens began wailing. Through the hangar doors, he watched ground crews run toward aircraft that would be outnumbered by impossible margins. Flight Lieutenant Westbrook appeared at his shoulder. "How long would it take you to modify the supercharger boost settings on all 12 of our operational Spitfires?" Westbrook asked urgently. The modifications Whitmore had been conceptualizing would take approximately 20 minutes per aircraft, bypassing every safety protocol mandated by RAF regulations. He could complete the entire flight within 3 hours if other mechanics assisted, while he handled precision calibration work. Implementing these modifications would violate direct orders and could result in imprisonment and dismissal from service, while failure to attempt them might result in pilot casualties when altitude performance could make the crucial difference. "I'm taking responsibility for authorizing these modifications," Westbrook said, providing Whitmore with defense against disciplinary charges while accepting personal responsibility for consequences that could affect both their careers. "If we're facing these odds today, let's do it fighting on equal terms." Whitmore's plan involved increasing supercharger boost pressure from 6 pounds to 9 pounds per square inch, theoretically increasing power output at high altitude by 15%, while simultaneously increasing risks of detonation, bearing failure, or complete engine seizure. Two other mechanics, Sergeant Malcolm Crenshaw and leading aircraft man Jasper Thornfield, wordlessly began assisting with basic adjustments, while Whitmore focused on precision work. The modifications required bypassing multiple safety systems designed to prevent exactly the overboost conditions he was deliberately creating. By 11:15, they had completed modifications on 8 aircraft, with Whitmore conducting final calibration checks while monitoring radio communications about approaching German formations. The moment of truth arrived at 11:42 when Squadron Leader Pembroke's modified Spitfire lifted off and began climbing toward an interception course at altitudes where no previous engagement had occurred during the Battle of Britain. Whitmore stood beside the runway, heart pounding, as he watched 12 aircraft whose engines he had modified beyond all safety parameters disappear into the hazy morning sky. Radio communications crackled with updates as the tactical situation developed. "Tally-ho, large formation of bandits at Angels 2-8, approaching from the southeast," came Pembroke's voice, reporting visual contact with enemy aircraft at 28,000 feet. The next transmission contained information that would rewrite Fighter Command tactical manuals. "Climbing to Angels 3-1, engines performing nominally, preparing to engage." For the first time since the Battle of Britain began, RF fighters were climbing above the altitude ceiling that German doctrine assumed represented the maximum operational limit for British interceptors. The tactical implications became immediately apparent as Pembroke's formation approached German bombers from above and behind, achieving positional advantage that Luftwaffe fighters had enjoyed throughout the previous month. "Engaging now. We have the height advantage," Pembroke reported, excitement evident in his voice. Machine gun and cannon fire could be heard in background transmissions, along with engine whines as pilots maneuvered for advantage in three-dimensional combat at altitudes where error margins approached zero. Over 20 minutes, radio transmissions painted a picture of aerial combat, unlike anything during previous Battle of Britain phases. Instead of defensive maneuvers against German fighters attacking from superior altitude, the modified Spitfires maintained energy advantage throughout engagement, forcing Messerschmitt pilots into disadvantageous climbing attacks that had previously characterized British tactics. "One Heinkel going down," came Westbrook's voice, followed by Pembroke's confirmation. 2 Messerschmitts neutralized, remaining bandits turning for home. The mathematical reality of aerial combat had been fundamentally altered by modifications that allowed British fighters to dictate engagement parameters instead of reacting to German initiatives, with results immediately apparent in both German losses and British survival rates exceeding every statistical model developed by operational research analysts. The immediate success of unauthorized engine modifications created strategic implications that reached RAF Fighter Command's highest levels within hours of Pembroke's squadron return. Air Chief Marshal Dowding received preliminary reports while monitoring the overall battle, his reaction reflecting both professional satisfaction at improved British performance and institutional concern about unauthorized modifications violating established protocols. Statistical evidence was undeniable. Pembroke's 12 modified Spitfires achieved combat effectiveness ratios exceeding normal fighter command performance by 300%, engaging 8 German aircraft successfully while suffering 0 losses compared to typical engagements resulting in roughly equal loss ratios. More significantly, altitude performance demonstrated by modified engines suggested systematic implementation across Fighter Command's inventory could eliminate tactical disadvantages characterizing British operations throughout the Battle of Britain. Within 6 hours, Whitmore was summoned to headquarters for a meeting determining whether his innovations resulted in commendation or disciplinary action. Air Commodore Quinton Mallory, who had flown combat missions during the Great War, possessed practical understanding, allowing him to appreciate both tactical significance and institutional challenges created by unauthorized implementation. "Sergeant Whitmore," Mallory said, "you have either saved Fighter Command or created the biggest disciplinary crisis in RAF history." Mallory's report to Fighter Command headquarters acknowledged both tactical success and serious regulatory violations, recommending immediate implementation across operational squadrons while requesting guidance about appropriate measures for personnel who had deliberately violated explicit orders. Dowding's response reflected pragmatic leadership, enabling Fighter Command's survival. Authorization for continued experimental use pending comprehensive engineering evaluation by Rolls-Royce specialists determining whether performance improvements justified increased failure risks. More significantly, orders included Whitmore's immediate transfer to Fighter Command headquarters, working directly with civilian engineers, developing standardized modification procedures implementable safely across the entire Spitfire inventory. Rolls-Royce engineers reviewing Whitmore's modifications expressed professional admiration for his intuitive Merlin engine understanding, while noting boost pressure increases exceeded recommended safety margins. However, wartime context and documented tactical benefits allowed authorization for continued experimental use while developing enhanced versions incorporating additional safety features. Collaboration between Whitmore and university-trained engineers produced synthesis of theoretical knowledge and practical experience, resulting in modification packages superior to individual contributions. Within 3 weeks, modified Spitfires operated from every Fighter Command base in southern England, equipped with standardized packages, providing altitude performance necessary for tactical parity with German fighters while incorporating safety features reducing engine failure rates to acceptable levels. The long-term consequences of Evander Whitmore's unauthorized modifications extended far beyond immediate Battle of Britain impact, creating institutional changes influencing military innovation throughout the war and post-war periods. Fighter Command's formal recognition included promotion to warrant officer and assignment to the newly created Technical Innovations Section, plus systematic procedures encouraging innovative proposals from enlisted personnel whose practical experience complemented theoretical knowledge of officers and civilian engineers. The supercharger modification success influenced broader RAF policies regarding regulatory compliance versus operational effectiveness, leading to revised procedures allowing field commanders greater discretion, authorizing experimental modifications when tactical conditions justified accepting technical risks for potential performance improvements. American and Commonwealth Air Forces studying RAF experiences identified systematic exploitation of practical innovation as significant factors in British success. Establishing similar programs encouraging technical experimentation by maintenance personnel possessing detailed aircraft performance knowledge under combat conditions. Personal correspondence between Whitmore and surviving squadron members provides evidence of lasting personal impact on pilots whose careers were enhanced by unauthorized modifications giving them altitude performance necessary for success against numerically superior formations. Flight Lieutenant Westbrook's letter, written after the war ended, captured emotional significance. You gave us back the sky when we thought we had lost it forever, and every sunrise since September 1940 has been a gift made possible by your courage to break rules that were limiting us. The reflection on courage versus obedience emerging from Whitmore's story illuminates fundamental questions about individual initiative and institutional authority, remaining relevant to organizations facing unprecedented challenges that existing procedures were never designed to address. His decision represented calculated risk weighing potential disciplinary action against mathematical certainty that continued procedural adherence would result in systematic fighter command weakening. Innovation success validated principles that experienced personnel thinking can provide solutions exceeding formal authority capabilities operating within established constraints, while demonstrating importance of accepting personal responsibility for decisions transcending normal organizational boundaries. Modern military organizations studying the Battle of Britain continue citing Whitmore's innovations as examples of bottom-up technical innovation value while maintaining necessary disciplinary structures, recognizing that obedience and initiative balance requires constant adjustment based on tactical conditions and strategic necessities. His willingness to accept personal risk providing tactical advantages for colleagues demonstrates moral courage, transcending institutional boundaries to focus on fundamental professional values no bureaucratic structure can adequately capture. The question Whitmore's story poses remains relevant. Would you have courage to risk everything for colleagues depending on your expertise and judgment? That answer defines individual character and institutional capacity to adapt when existing procedures prove inadequate for challenges threatening fundamental values and operational success. Comment below and share this story so others remember what real courage means when survival mathematics require innovation, transcending regulatory compliance safety to embrace moral imperatives for action when action offers the only hope of achieving what matters most.